Those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Seems like a good slogan for the Iraq War, doesn't it? This week on Off the Grid, we follow our coverage of 9/11 just as the Bush administration followed the actual tragedy with the Iraq War. Let's go to my vigilant producer, Alex Logan, with our history lesson on America's battle with Saddam. Alex?
So, Governor, you were vocal about your opposition to the Iraq War from early on. When did you first begin to doubt our intentions in Iraq, and what kind of response did you get for your criticism?
Well, the thing that bothered me initially on Iraq, I got out of office in January of '03, and it was March that Bush made the decision we were going to invade and go to war with Iraq. The bell went off. I said, wait a minute. They told us that 19 Islamic radicals armed with box cutters defeated our multi-billion-dollar air defense system, all while conspiring with a bearded guy in a cave in Afghanistan. The point being is, of these 19 alleged hijackers, there wasn't one from Iraq. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and we were going to war because of 9/11. Why would we go to war with Iraq, who had nothing, that was not responsible for anything?
Well, let's go back to the beginning to find out why we did end up in that war in Iraq. So the U.S. may have invaded Iraq in March of 2003, but the United States' march to war began not long after President George W. Bush's inauguration. At Bush's inaugural national security meeting, the first item discussed was removing Saddam Hussein from power. Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill wrote, "It was all about finding a way to do it." The president saying, "Go find me a way to do this." Then in March of that year, there was a Pentagon document entitled Foreign Suitors for Iraqi Oil Field Contracts, which talks about carving the country's fuel reserves up between the world's oil companies. It talks about contractors from around the world, 30 to 40 countries, and which ones have what intentions on oil in Iraq. So what do you think, Governor? Sounds like there was never any question about invading Iraq from the very beginning.
And it also sounds like, as the protesters said, no war for oil. Our military is not being used in defense of our country. Our military is being used as the strong arm for multinational corporations, which in this case were oil companies. So by us invading, it gave them carte blanche to divide up Iraq's oil and make huge amounts of profits at the expense of the American people, our budget, and worst of all, our blood.
Well, the Bush administration seemingly put their conflict with Iraq to rest until a crisis became an opportunity on September 11, 2001. And on September 12th, President Bush told the chairman of the Counterterrorism Security Group, Richard Clarke, "I want you, as soon as you can, to go back over everything. See if Saddam did this." When Clarke responds by saying that al-Qaeda did this, Bush says, I know, but see if Saddam was involved. Just look, I want to know any shred."
This is why I rate George W. Bush the worst president in my lifetime. Not only did they invade Iraq, they started torturing people. So the United States now is synonymous with torture instead of taking the high ground. That destroyed my American dream, because that's what the Nazis did, that's what the communists did, and now we've done it. We've behaved the same way they did. So in my opinion, we're really no better.
Well, 9 days later, President Bush got his answer in a highly classified briefing that the U.S. intelligence community had no evidence linking Saddam Hussein to the attacks, and that there was scant, credible evidence that Iraq had any significant collaborative ties with al-Qaeda, according to the government records and current and former officials with first-hand knowledge of the matter. So what do you do when you don't get the answer you want? You set up your own intelligence unit. Designed to operate without detection and under Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's direct control, the Strategic Support Branch deploys small teams of case officers, linguists, interrogators, and technical specialists alongside newly empowered Special Operation Forces. And in one of his memos written at the time, dated September 30th, 2001, Rumsfeld wrote, "If the war does not significantly change the world's political map, the U.S. will not achieve its aim." So this sounds like the U.S. government was already on its way to war, not just with a single country, but with an entire region.
Absolutely. It's an agenda. All of this stuff ties together, and that's what really gets me about the American people. The American people will believe anything, basically, that our government has done except 9/11. They believe now that the Iraq war shouldn't have been fought. They believe it was fought under lies. Weapons of mass destruction, ties to Al-Qaeda, all proved to be lies. All of that goes on, and yet nobody will take the step back to question the catalyst or the false flag that put us into the war. Was 9/11 a false flag operation? I don't know. A lot of things indicate it was. Some indicate it wasn't, but certainly 9/11 changed America. We have never been the same since it, and we will probably never be the same again because of it.
So the US government had their archenemy all lined up, and so begins the greatest smear campaign in recent history, all with the President's State of the Union. On January 29, 2002, Bush warned the nation that North Korea, Iran, and you guessed it, Iraq constituted an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world.
And you know what, Alex? They're simply doing what we've already done. I always find the hypocrisy astounding. We need to fear Saddam because Saddam might actually have and do what we do. Our government sounds worse than the most sleazy Hollywood casting director.
Well, now in June 2002, the bombing of Iraq begins. According to Mother Jones, the military will fly 21,736 sorties and attack 349 targets between now and the start of the war. Back at home, Bush, Rumsfeld, and Cheney were taking every opportunity to vilify Iraq, but at the same time, not admit to the coming war. On August 20th, Rumsfeld said, "There are Al-Qaeda in Iraq. There are." While Bush was telling the press on the same day, "We may or may not attack. I have no idea yet." On August 26th, Cheney said in a speech to the VFW's 103rd National Convention, "There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends and against us." On September 25th, Bush argued that Al-Qaeda and the regime of Saddam Hussein are, quote, equally as bad, equally as evil, and equally as destructive, and that you can't distinguish between Al-Qaeda and Saddam when you talk about the war on terror. When Rumsfeld was asked in a press conference about Saddam declaring that he possessed no weapons of mass destruction and had no relationship with Al-Qaeda, Rumsfeld fired back, and Abraham Lincoln was short. So the blurring of lines between Iraq and September 11th worked because in a Washington Post poll taken in September 2003, 69% of Americans said they believe it is likely the Iraqi leader was personally involved in the attacks carried out by Al-Qaeda. So does this surprise you, Jesse, that we the people could be hoodwinked by what is basically a propaganda campaign?
Not at all. Not at all. We were lied to, people. What he just read you were flagrant lies. If we lie to the government, we go to jail. How come it's okay for them to lie to us and there's no repercussions for it? How come Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush aren't brought forward and questioned, why did you tell us this shit? Why did you lie to us to go to war? But it ain't gonna happen because the people of the United States will never admit to being wrong. And the Iraq war was wrong, is wrong, and still is wrong.
So after months of a witch hunt for non-existent weapons of mass destruction, which we'll cover in the next part of our Iraq Week on Off the Grid, Bush said in a weekly radio address, "We are doing everything we can to avoid war in Iraq. But if Saddam Hussein does not disarm peacefully, he will be disarmed by force." Less than 2 weeks later, on March 20th, 2003, the war in Iraq officially begins with an invasion of 148,000 U.S. troops. Hearing all of this, do you feel vindicated in your criticism of the war, Governor? Were we wrong to attack Iraq?
Absolutely, we were wrong. Jesse Ventura believes this. If you're the superpower of the world, you should be humble. You should only attack when you've been attacked. What right do we have to go out and arbitrarily just line our military up, invade another country, overthrow its government, and occupy them? I mean, we went into the Iraq war not even having an exit strategy. Why? Because we have no plans to exit there. Because the war is not over, people. Its head is rising again, and we will fight it all over again. Welcome to Vietnam. That's it for the first part of Iraq Week on Off the Grid. You can keep our conversation going online and at the sites below, and as always, please stay vigilant. They told us that 19 Islamic radicals armed with box cutters defeated our multi-billion-dollar air defense system, all while conspiring with a bearded guy in a cave in Afghanistan. The point being is, of these 19 alleged, follow our coverage of 9/11 just as the Bush administration followed the actual tragedy with the Iraq War. Let's go to my vigilant producer, Alex Logan, with our history lesson on America's battle with Saddam. Alex?
So, Governor, you were vocal about your opposition to the Iraq War from early on. When did you first begin to doubt our intentions in Iraq, and what kind of response did you get for your criticism?
Well, the thing that bothered me initially on Iraq, I got out of office in January of '03, and it was March that Bush made the decision we were going to invade and go to war with Iraq. The bell went off. I said, wait a minute, hijackers, there wasn't one from Iraq. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and we were going to war because of 9/11. Why would we go to war with Iraq, who had nothing, that was not responsible for anything?
Well, let's go back to the beginning to find out.
Those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Seems like a good slogan for the Iraq War, doesn't it? This week on Off the Grid, we